Within the dense and verdant hills of Gwangju, in the Gyeonggi province of South Korea, stands a decaying concrete skeleton that has become legendary among thrill seekers and paranormal investigators across the globe. This structure is the Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital, which is a place so notorious that it was named one of the 7 freakiest places on the planet by CNN Travel. The building is gray and imposing, and it sits rotting away while nature slowly reclaims the land around it. Vines crawl up the cracked walls like green veins, choking the life out of the masonry. It is a location where the silence is heavy and oppressive, pressing down on anyone foolish enough to trespass. The air surrounding the asylum feels colder than the ambient temperature, suggesting that something unseen lingers here. Locals avoid the area and whisper stories of the restless dead who walk the halls. The legend of Gonjiam is not merely a tale of an abandoned building, but a chronicle of human suffering and madness that has seeped into the very foundation of the architecture. For decades, the hospital has stood empty, its doors locked with rusted chains, and its windows shattered like jagged teeth. Despite the heavy metal gates and the numerous warning signs posted by the authorities, curiosity draws people in like moths to a flame. They come with cameras and flashlights, hoping to capture evidence of the afterlife. But many leave with far more than they bargained for. The psychological weight of the place is palpable, and some visitors report feeling an intense sense of being watched from the moment they step onto the overgrown path leading to the entrance. It is a place where the barrier between the living and the dead feels terrifyingly thin. Before the peeling paint and the debris-littered corridors became the defining features of this location. It was a functioning medical facility intended to care for the mentally ill and the unstable. Established in the late 20th century, the hospital was situated strategically away from the bustling city centers to provide seclusion and quiet for its patients. However, this isolation would eventually become its greatest curse, allowing dark secrets to fester behind its walls without scrutiny from the outside world. The layout of the building was purely functional, with long, sterile hallways and rooms designed for containment rather than comfort. In its prime, the hospital was filled with the sounds of doctors, nurses, and the troubled souls who resided there. But now only the sound of dripping water and settling concrete remains. The history of the hospital is shrouded in a mixture of verifiable facts and terrifying urban legends that have become impossible to separate. According to local lore, the troubles began with the director of the hospital, who was a man described as brilliant but deeply disturbed. Rumors persist that he viewed his patients not as people in need of healing, but as subjects for his own twisted experiments. The isolation of the facility meant that he could operate with little oversight, and the cries echoing from the treatment rooms were swallowed by the surrounding forest. It is said that he became obsessed with the concept of the human soul and the thresholds of pain, attempting to find where the mind broke completely. These stories paint a picture of a man who descended into madness alongside the very people he was meant to treat. During the operational years of the Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital, the mortality rate began to climb in a way that could not be explained by natural causes or typical medical complications. Patients who were physically healthy would be found dead in their beds, with expressions of sheer terror frozen on their faces. Others vanished from their rooms, entirely leaving behind no trace of where they had gone. The official reports often cited heart failure or suicide, but the families of the victims were never satisfied with these explanations. Whispers among the staff suggested that the director was conducting rituals or using unconventional methods that bordered on torture. The atmosphere inside the hospital grew tense, and fear became the dominant emotion for both the patients and the employees who worked the night shifts. The decline of the facility was rapid and chaotic, culminating in its sudden closure in the 1990s. The official reason given for the shutdown was economic downturns and sanitation issues specifically related to the sewage system. However, the local population tells a much different and darker story. They claim that the spirits of the mistreated patients rose up in vengeance, driving the staff to insanity and forcing the director to flee the country. Some versions of the legend say the director did not escape, but took his own life in his office, unable to bear the weight of the atrocities he had committed. Regardless of the truth, the hospital was abandoned in a hurry. Medical equipment, patient records, and personal belongings were left behind, as if everyone had vanished in a single instant. After the doors were barred and the facility was left to rot, the stories of hauntings began to spread throughout South Korea and eventually the world. People passing by the perimeter fence reported hearing disembodied screams echoing from the upper floors late at night. Shadows were seen moving past the broken windows, even though no living person was inside. The reputation of Gonjiam grew to mythic proportions, and it became a rite of passage for students and internet broadcasters to break in and test their courage. These illegal expeditions often resulted in terrified accounts of slamming doors, mysterious scratches appearing on skin, and electronic equipment failing without reason. The hospital became a character in itself, a malevolent entity that seemed to feed on the fear of those who entered. One particular area of the hospital gained more notoriety than any other part of the complex, and that is the infamous room 402. This room is located on the 4th floor, and according to every urban legend associated with the site, it is the heart of the darkness. unlike the other rooms, which can be accessed by pushing open the rotting wooden doors. Room 402 is always securely locked. There are stories of explorers bringing heavy tools like crowbars and hammers to try and force it open, but failing every time. It is said that the room is cursed, and that anyone who manages to look inside will be cursed to die shortly after. The mystery of what lies behind that reinforced door has driven countless people to risk their safety to find out. Let us delve into a specific account from a group of urban explorers who visited the site in the early 2000s. This group consisted of 4 friends named Minjun Sajantihang and Jiwon, who were equipped with high-quality cameras and audio recorders. They arrived at the base of the hill just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dense forest that hid the asylum from the main road. The air was still and humid, typical of a Korean summer. But as they approached the perimeter fence, the temperature dropped noticeably. They found a hole in the chain link fence that had been cut by previous trespassers and squeezed through one by one. Their laughter was nervous and forced as they tried to mask their apprehension with bravado. As the group crunched over the gravel and broken glass leading to the main entrance, the sheer scale of the building became apparent. The concrete was stained with moss and water damage, giving it the appearance of bruised skin. The front doors were missing, allowing the gaping maw of the main lobby to swallow the light from their flashlights. They stepped inside, and the smell hit them immediately. It was a mixture of mold, damp earth, and something distinctively metallic, like old copper or dried blood. The silence inside was absolute, until their footsteps echoed on the tiled floor, creating a cacophony that seemed too loud for the space. They agreed to stick together and began their exploration on the first floor, where the administrative offices and reception areas were located. The first floor was littered with the detritus of the past. Papers were strewn across the floor, covered in dust and grime. Minjun picked up a patient file that was lying on a rusted metal desk. The ink was faded, but legible, revealing the name of a young woman admitted for depression who had died just weeks after her arrival. The cause of death was listed simply as cardiac arrest, but the margins of the paper were filled with frantic scribbles that looked like repeated pleas for help. This discovery set a grim tone for the expedition. The friends realized that the stories they had heard were grounded in the reality of real people who had lived and died in misery within these walls. The atmosphere grew heavier, and the air felt thick, making it difficult to breathe comfortably. Moving up to the second floor, the group entered the patient wards. This area consisted of a long central corridor with rooms branching off on either side. Most of the doors were open or missing, revealing small, cramped spaces that once held metal bed frames and thin mattresses. In one room, they found a white doctor coat hanging on a hook untouched by the decay that surrounded it. It was a jarring sight, as if the doctor had just stepped out for a moment and would return any second. Sajin reached out to touch the fabric, but pulled her hand back, instantly claiming it felt ice cold. The flashlight beams cut through the darkness, catching dust motes that danced in the air. But every so often the light seemed to flicker or dim, as if the batteries were being drained by an external force. On the third floor, the layout changed to include treatment rooms and what looked like a recreation area. In the center of the recreation room sat a lonely wheelchair facing the wall. It is a common trope in horror movies, but seeing it in reality sent a shiver down their spines. Tihang, who was the skeptic of the group, walked over to the wheelchair to inspect it. He noted that the wheels were rusted solid, implying it had not moved in years. Yet as he turned away to rejoin the group, a distinct squeak echoed through the room. They all whipped around to see the wheelchair had rotated slightly to face them. There was no wind, and the floor was level. Panic began to bubble beneath the surface of their calm facades. It was on the third floor that the auditory phenomena began in earnest. Jiwon, who was wearing headphones connected to a parabolic microphone, suddenly ripped them off her head with a gasp. She claimed she heard a woman whispering directly into her ear, even though no one was standing close enough to do so. She described the voice as wet and gurgling, saying something that sounded like "get out," repeated over and over. The group paused, debating whether to turn back, but the allure of the infamous fourth floor and room 402 pushed them forward. They convinced themselves it was just the wind or their imagination playing tricks on them in the dark environment. They ascended the stairs to the fourth floor, and the atmosphere shifted from merely creepy to overtly hostile. The air here was freezing cold, and they could see their breath misting in the beams of their lights. The hallway seemed longer than the ones below, stretching out into an infinite darkness. The doors here were heavy metal instead of wood, indicating that this floor was for the most dangerous or disturbed patients. They walked slowly, checking each room number until they reached the end of the hall. There it stood, room 402. The door was battered and covered in graffiti left by previous visitors, but the handle remained firm, and the heavy lock was still in place. There was no way to see inside, except for a small rectangular viewing slit that had been painted over with black paint. Minjun and Tihang decided to try and pry the door open. They had brought a small crowbar for this specific purpose. They wedged the metal tool into the doorframe and began to heave with all their strength. The metal groaned and screeched, protesting the intrusion. As they applied pressure, a loud banging sound erupted from the other side of the door. It was not a mechanical sound, but the distinct rhythmic pounding of fists against the metal. Bam, bam, bam. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space. The group froze, staring at the door in disbelief. The banging stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. There was someone or something inside that room, and it knew they were there. Terrified, but driven by a morbid curiosity, Ji-won shined her flashlight at the painted, overviewing slit. She noticed a tiny scratch in the paint where the glass was visible. Trembling, she leaned in close to peer through the minuscule opening. For a moment, she saw nothing but pitch-black darkness. Then she screamed. She stumbled back, dropping her flashlight, which rolled across the floor, creating a strobe effect. She claimed she saw an eye, a wide, bloodshot eye staring back at her from inches away. She said it was not human. The pupil was blown wide, and the skin around it was gray and necrotic. The encounter broke the group's resolve completely. They scrambled to grab their gear, intending to leave immediately. As they turned to run back down the hallway, the lights in the corridor began to flicker violently. The beams from their flashlights, which were fresh and fully charged, started to die out one by one. Plunged into near total darkness, they had to rely on the night vision mode of their camcorder. Through the small green screen of the camera, Tihang saw a figure standing at the far end of the hall near the staircase. It was a tall shadow darker than the surrounding gloom. The figure had long hair that hung down covering its face, and it wore what looked like a tattered hospital gown. It stood perfectly, still blocking their only exit. The temperature plummeted further, causing their teeth to chatter uncontrollably. The figure at the end of the hall took a step forward. The movement was jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being manipulated by unseen strings. The sound of bare feet slapping against the cold concrete echoed towards them. Slap, slap, slap. The group retreated, moving backward toward room 402, having nowhere else to go. The entity was gaining on them, moving with a terrifying speed that defied logic. Suddenly, the door to room 402, which had been locked tight just moments ago, clicked. The heavy metal door swung open slowly, with a long, drawn-out creak, revealing the abyss inside. They were trapped between the advancing horror in the hall and the unknown terror of the room. Desperation took over. They realized they could not enter the room, so they had to force their way past the figure. Screaming in unison, to build their courage, they charged down the hallway. Minjun, who was in the lead, swung the crowbar wildly at the shadow. The weapon passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke, meeting no resistance. An icy shockwave passed through Minjun's body, causing him to fall to his knees retching. The others grabbed him, dragging him along as they sprinted for the stairs. They did not look back. They could hear the wet, slapping footsteps right behind them, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that vibrated in their chests. They tumbled down the stairs, tripping over debris and each other in their panic. When they reached the 3rd floor, they heard doors slamming shut all around them. Slam, slam, slam. It was as if the building itself was coming alive, trying to seal them inside. They reached the second floor, and the sound of crying babies filled the air. It was a cacophony of wails that pierced their ears, coming from every direction. The walls seemed to pulse and breathe, and the graffiti faces painted by vandals appeared to twist into expressions of agony. The environment had transformed into a nightmare landscape where the laws of physics no longer applied. Finally reaching the first floor, they saw the moonlight spilling in through the main entrance. It looked like salvation. They bolted for the exit, their lungs burning, and their hearts hammering against their ribs. As they crossed the threshold into the cool night air, they felt a physical sensation of resistance, as if they were pushing through a thick, gelatinous membrane. Breaking through, they collapsed onto the grass outside, gasping for air. The forest around them was silent. The crickets had stopped chirping, and the wind had died down. They looked back at the hospital building one last time before fleeing to their car. From the safety of the car, they looked up at the fourth floor window, corresponding to room 402. There, standing in the window, was a silhouette. It was watching them as the car engine roared to life and the headlights cut through the dark. The silhouette raised a hand and waved slowly. It was a mocking gesture, a final reminder that they had trespassed in a domain that did not belong to them. They sped away down the winding mountain road, not stopping, until they reached the bright lights of the city. None of them spoke during the drive, each one processing the trauma in their own way. The aftermath of the expedition was profound for all four friends. Minjun suffered from severe hypothermia symptoms for days despite it being summer. He developed a high fever and drifted in and out of delirium, mumbling about the eye in the door. Jiwon, who had heard the voices, developed chronic tinnitus and could not sleep without lights on for years. Tihang reviewed the footage they had captured on the camcorder. The video showed the hallway and the door, but the figure they had seen with their own eyes was missing. Instead, where the figure should have been, there was a distortion in the video, a patch of static that moved and shifted. However, the audio recorder picked up something the camera missed. When they played back the audio from the moment they were trapped in the hallway, they heard their own screams and the banging on the door. But underneath that noise, there was a voice. It was calm, cold, and distinct. It spoke in an old dialect of Korean that had not been used in decades. The voice whispered a single phrase, repeated 3 times. "You are mine. You are mine. You are mine." The discovery of this recording chilled them to the bone, confirming that something intelligent and possessive resided in that concrete tomb. The story of their encounter spread online, adding to the growing legend of Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital. It inspired a horror movie and countless other YouTube videos, but few dared to go as deep into the building as they did. The hospital remained a beacon for the supernatural community, a place where the veil was thin. Skeptics argued that infrasound or mold spores caused hallucinations, but those who experienced the dread firsthand knew better. The fear was primal, and the presence was undeniable. The building was not just an empty shell. It was a vessel for the souls that had been tormented there. In recent years, the local government decided that the risk to public safety was too great. The constant flow of trespassers, combined with the deteriorating structure, created a liability. Discussions began about demolishing the site completely to erase the stain on the region. However, even the demolition crews faced issues. Equipment would malfunction inexplicably, and workers would refuse to go into certain areas, citing an overwhelming feeling of dread. It seemed the hospital did not want to be destroyed. It fought back against the wrecking balls and bulldozers, holding onto its existence with a supernatural grip. Eventually, the structure was brought down, but the land remains. The concrete was crushed, and the metal was scrapped, but the energy of the place could not be so easily removed. The hill where Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital once stood is now a barren patch of earth. Plants struggle to grow there, and animals avoid the site. Locals say that if you stand on the hill at night, you can still hear the faint sound of screaming and the banging of metal doors. The physical building is gone, but the spiritual imprint remains a scar on the landscape that refuses to heal. The legacy of Gonjiam serves as a grim reminder of the darkness that can inhabit human institutions. It is a story of power, abuse, neglect, and the lingering consequences of suffering. The ghosts of the patients who died there were not just figments of imagination, but echoes of a tragedy that was never properly resolved. They were trapped in life by the walls of the asylum, and they seemed to remain trapped in death, bound to the soil where they took their last breaths. The destruction of the building did not free them. It only removed their shelter, leaving them exposed and angry. For those who seek out the paranormal, Gonjiam was the holy grail of haunted locations. It was a place where the evidence was visceral and the danger felt real. Now that it is gone, the legend has only grown stronger. It has become a ghost story in the truest sense, a tale passed down through whispers and internet forums, keeping the memory of the horror alive. The video footage and photos taken by explorers are the only physical proof that remains artifacts of a nightmare that once stood tall in the Korean hills. So if you ever find yourself driving through the Gyeonggi province late at night, and you see a dense patch of forest where the fog clings a little too tightly to the ground to drive past, do not stop. Do not try to find the old road that leads up the hill. The hospital may be gone, but the residents are still there waiting in the dark for someone to acknowledge them. They are waiting for the next visitor to whisper into their ear. They are waiting to claim what is theirs. The darkness of Gonjiam is patient, and it is eternal. The psychological impact of such places forces us to confront our own fears of insanity and confinement. The idea of being locked away unheard and forgotten is a universal human terror. Gonjiam embodied that terror in concrete and steel. It was a physical manifestation of the mind gone wrong. The shattered windows were like empty eyes, and the dark corridors were like the twisting paths of a broken psyche. Exploring it was a journey into the heart of madness itself. Even today, the survivors of the hospital, the staff who fled, and the few patients who were transferred elsewhere refuse to speak of it. Their silence speaks volumes. It is a silence born of trauma and a desire to forget. But the internet never forgets. The images of the rotting, wheelchairs the patient files, and the ominous door of room 402 circulate endlessly, keeping the fear fresh. The digital age has ensured that Gonjiam will never truly die. As we conclude this journey into the macabre history of South Korea, remember that some doors are locked for a reason. Some places are abandoned because they are not meant for the living. The curiosity that drives us to explore the unknown is a powerful force, but it must be tempered with respect for the tragedy that occurred. Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital was a monument to pain. And while the monument has fallen, the pain endures, vibrating in the air, invisible but ever present. Let the story of Gonjiam be a warning. There are corners of this world where the light does not reach, and where the rules of our reality bend and break. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there is no denying the heavy atmosphere of a place soaked in death. Walk carefully in the dark and listen closely to the silence. You might just hear the sound of a wheelchair squeaking or a door slamming shut in the distance. And if you do run,